We'll go ahead and kick it off now. I want to welcome all of you here. This is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us to share what's happening on this campus and around the country, really, when it comes to outreach and engagement. I've been instructed on how to change this. So, whoop. Oh, I didn't do it right. Ambassador McMullen over here to my right, to your left, has actually some of the beautiful artwork from the Mobile Museum, and I want to pass it around later. It's quite nice with the ragbri, I think it was what it was for. Anyway, let me kick it off. I'm here to say welcome. I'm also going to share with you what we have done at this university historically when it comes to outreach and engagement. And then I want to share with you some examples of things we've been doing in the last couple of years. It's obviously not all inclusive because we do so much, but I do want to share with you just some snippets of outreach and engagement that I share when I go on the road to speak to Rotary clubs and other civic groups. I would also say that many of the people in the audience here tonight have contributed to these projects. And what you'll see is they're varied in the type of projects, the communities they engage with, but it's because of a lot of people in this audience that we have been able to really put together a really nice portfolio of activities. Let me start, though, with a couple of slides just to speak briefly about the legacy of service and engagement at this university. It goes back to the very beginning. Obviously, as the first public university, you know, a core mission we have is to serve the people of Iowa. We do it a lot of different ways. We do it in the classrooms, but we also do it when it comes to outreach and engagement throughout the state. Some examples in the healthcare and the public health arena. First, Children's Hospital with specialty hospital in the state. Our blood donor center was one of the first in the country. College of Pharmacy, working with the college, with the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. IIHR, the Hydraulics Institute as it's called. Long history of research throughout the 100 and probably close to 100 years now, serving the state in a lot of different areas, primarily in water. In addition, we all know the history of educational testing and measurement and what that has done from a research activity on this campus, becoming basically a business that serves the entire country and now the world, actually, in terms of assessment and what it can do for understanding learning. Of course, in the art and writing, we defined basically the Iowa culture through such great names as Grant Wood, Marilyn Robinson, Paul Engel, in all different areas. I've listed just three there to give you some examples. And over the last couple of years, and obviously with the flood at the museum, with our mural, traveling not just the state of Iowa, where it saw, I think in 6 months, I think we had something like 60,000 visitors in Des Moines or more, Sioux City, but also around the world, Los Angeles, in Venice and other cities throughout this coming year. And in fact, the numbers will probably approach 1 million by the time we're done in the next year or two. So when you think about outreach and engagement and sharing something like that, our international writing programs, we had the opening ceremony, the opening picnic a couple of weeks ago. Chris Merrill hosted it, and we have this year, I think, 33 writers from 33 different countries thereabout. Over the years, 1,400 writers coming to Iowa City from 140 countries. So bringing people here and then returning home to their countries to share what they've learned here. Hampshire has a long history. We've heard a lot in the last 7 years, actually, of Hampshire being on the road, and Chuck is here with us. Thank you for all you do, Chuck. And but it really goes back to the 1970s. It's not just the building, but it's that outreach to the state that just continues and was amplified, actually, during the past 7 to 8 years as a result of the floods. And of course, the Natural History Museum, we take that for granted over here in the Pentacrest, but if you go back to the early days for both Professors Calvin and McBride and their pioneering work in terms of taking things out to the state. In fact, if you go out to Lake Okoboji and you look at some of the original research labs that are out there, were actually transported from Iowa City out there on trains and put in place years ago, almost over 100 years ago now. But let's talk about what's going on today in the past few years, especially. Our strategic plan has 4 pillars as shown on this slide of the old Capitol. I want to focus just on the 4th pillar, which is titled Better Futures for Iowans. And that's where the connection really comes in here. When Linda and I were getting together, I think about 2 to 3 years ago, to talk about how can we do more when it comes to outreach and engagement, it was natural to connect it with our strategic plan, the 4th pillar. And so my charge to Linda was really take that pillar and make it happen more than what we're already doing. And so that's what she did. Let me share some of the things that were already going on, though, around the university. And I broke this down into different categories to try to show you that I think those of you in the room who are experts in this area, that when we talk outreach and engagement or better futures for Iowans, it really comes under a lot of different subcategories, if you want to think of it that way. The first one I highlight is technical assistance. The example I give here is the Iowa Flood Center, an excellent, excellent example of how expertise on this campus can support the entire state of Iowa, and in fact it does on an annual basis. When we get to the rainy season, so to speak, in Iowa, you can get online, you can check down to literally your block where you live in your community to find out what the flood situation is. An excellent, excellent technical assistance for the state. Campus community partnerships, I call that another category. The example I give here is Tippie College of Business. Tippie is working on, I think, house number 8 Tippie build now. These are partnership with Habitat for Humanity, where the faculty and students raise money and also go out and build the homes. If you get online right now, you'll see, I think, house number 7 in progress. And again, an ongoing process. It's local. It's in the Iowa City Coralville community, a little different than some of the other projects. But here you have students and faculty, staff working together in the community. And more importantly, as we'll hear from our keynote speaker, we get something out of it. It's not just a one-way opportunity for us to do something for the community, but our students get something out of it in terms of their growth, their leadership skills, etc. The next one I have is the subcategory, I refer to it as community education, Arts Share. This is something that I hear about all the time when I'm traveling around the state and what it's done for different communities. And our goal is to try to really increase that as well in the coming years. This is an opportunity to get out there and take expertise from this campus in the arts, take it out to the communities, and share with them what we do. Music programs in the Iowa prisons. The photograph on the lower right is from the Oakdale facility from Professor Mary Cohen and the work that she does with the corrections department to try to bring community members from the university, from Iowa City Coralville, together with the inmates to present and practice and then present their choir progress throughout the year. They do a Christmas concert each year and then also one in the summer, I believe. But again, a nice way to take something that is a research area, that is in terms of the opportunities that something like performance in a choir brings to people who are incarcerated, and actually take it out into the community. And if you haven't been to this, I would encourage you to get on Mary's invitation list. It's usually about the first week in December each year, and it's really quite a special event. And lastly on this list is the mobile museum. As Dan Reed mentioned, it's parked right outside here. It was earlier today. This is an excellent, excellent thought that came, Dan, I think a couple years ago, decided we need to get the museums and get them out there on the road. I think some of the examples that you'll hear about later in terms of the thousands, tens of thousands of people who get a chance to see this. It goes along with RAGBRAI and, from little town to little town, and people get a chance to come out and see what we have at the university to share in educational activities as well. A couple of others, we have an excellent debate group here on this campus. It's been that way for decades. It's actually a national caliber, top performing debate team. And they work with a variety of different organizations around the state. I'll give you one example. It was in this room about a year ago that members of the debate team participated in a conference that we were having on renewable energy. And so they were taking the side of yes and no and, the sort of counterpoint issues on the value and cost of renewable energy in the state of Iowa. They are excellent at what they do, and that debate was amazing. I went home and I said that was the most lively conference I've been to, because we had these these high caliber students debating a topic, and it was really, really impressive to see that. But again, it's a strength we have, and we use it in a different type of forum. Of course, we have distance education. We have a lot of programs online. The one I mentioned here is the BSN program. Here you have nurses out in the state of Iowa with associate's degrees who want to get a bachelor's degree. Because of our online BSN program, they are able to graduate with a bachelor's degree without coming back to Iowa City. And the attendance and the enrollments in those programs are pretty impressive when you see. And more importantly, these are people who can't just pack up and come to Iowa City to get the bachelor's degree. They already have an associate's degree. They're working. Generally, they're place-bound in their communities, but they can get one of our degrees by going online. And last one I have on this particular slide is the Political Sciences Policy Research Organization. This is a group that provides research for our legislators in Des Moines. The other category I've listed here, service learning, community-based learning. The Iowa Institute for Sustainable Communities. Chuck Connerly is in the audience tonight. I saw him, there he is in the back row. And Chuck, I want to thank you for everything you've done in this area for the last several years. It has just grown beyond our imagination, and it is really a special program to go out and work with communities. And again, as we like to say, a two-way street. Our students get something out of it, the communities get something out of it in return. And then, of course, alternative spring breaks. We're doing many, many of those in various parts around the country. Clinical services are obvious for this campus, but let me just mention a few. The speech and hearing clinic programs that we put on in the summer. College of Dentistry, Mission of Mercy, they participate through the Mission of Mercy program in the state of Iowa. Dental students, faculty, going out and working in a clinic in a room about the size of this on a Saturday morning, seeing over 1,000, 1,500 people who want to come in and get dental care, free dental care, various places throughout the state, and you can see a photograph there of one of our students or faculty working with one of the patients there. And then, of course, clinical services. When you think about the hospitals and clinics, the colleges, the health science colleges, the numbers are just staggering. Whether it's here in Iowa City or somewhere around the state at one of our clinics, millions of people, millions of visits, just an amazing amount. And then also in terms of educating those people and putting them out into the communities as well to serve in those professional positions. And of course, the Iowa Public Health Laboratory. This is something that we're very proud of and gets very little sort of publicity a lot of times. But I like to go on the road and talk about it because if you put a map of Iowa together like I have here, what you have, over 500, 600,000 tests annually. Every newborn child in the state of Iowa, the test is conducted at the hygienic lab for newborn screening. We do rapid response to water issues. Anything that comes up, that group is working on it. And you talk about a service to the state of Iowa in terms of being able to serve many, many communities throughout Iowa and actually beyond the borders as well. The Museum of Art. We don't have a Museum of Art right now. We have an art collection and we have a Museum of Art on paper, a physical building we don't have. We're in the process right now actually of designing it, and you'll see shortly actually some of the designs for it. But what have we done in the meantime? What have we done in the times that we've been sort of without the museum? Well, we have upstairs, up here in the Ritchie Ballroom, we have the Black Box Theater on the second floor as well. We have other sites where we're showing art. We go around the state. But what Sean O'Hara, sitting in the back of the room, has been able to do for us is to take it beyond just the physical building. Take it out to the state. I mentioned earlier Jackson Pollock's mural and what we've done with that in terms of Des Moines, Los Angeles, Venice, and other places. We now have opportunities to share with other museums around the state to be able to take one of the most valued pieces of art in the world and take it to the Sioux City Art Museum and set it up there for several months to be able to share it with people from Western Iowa is an incredible statement. That just doesn't happen by saying, take it to Sioux City. Believe me, I've worked with Sean enough now to know that it's a very difficult process. There's a lot of paperwork to go through. There's a lot of logistics. But at the end of the day, as a state university, we're doing it. And I think that's an incredible message from the whole museum staff as well. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Linda Snetselaar. Linda joined the office, I think, around 2 years ago, and as I mentioned earlier, was charged with really growing community partnerships, but also just taking stock of what we're doing. It wasn't like we were starting from ground zero. We had a lot of things happening, but her job was to sort of organize that in a way and then grow it beyond that. So what I'd like Linda to do now is to share a little bit about what we've been doing in her office and some of the success stories over the last couple of years. Linda, come on up.
Thank you all for being here this evening. Really appreciate that. Can everyone hear me? One of the things that we're trying to do in our office is really focus on the concept of engaging communities. And while the word outreach is a part of our title, even the outreach that we're doing really involves a lot of the concept of finding out from our communities what they care about, and then going into those communities and actually enhancing many of the very positive things that they already have going on. So our partnerships with communities is really incredibly important to us. We have a variety of programs, and before I talk about these programs, I would like for the staff in my office to stand up. So Erica Christensen, if you would stand up. Nick Benson, Haley Courtney, Jade Monternock, okay, and we have Rosina Liu, and Sarah San Giovanni. Fantastic. I think I hit everyone. Oh, Leslie Feener, I want to be sure to recognize her too. Okay, great. One of the programs that we feature is Art Share, and Leslie Feener has done just a fantastic job of bringing arts and humanities, which is something we do really, really well on this campus, to 82 different counties in the state, and that number just keeps going up. So that's been just an incredibly positive effort. She recently was in Maquoketa, and they had a classical concert, and one of the citizens in Maquoketa said that was probably the first time in 50 years that they'd actually been able to have a concert like that. So thank you, thank you. That has just been a wonderful way of sharing in our state. The Grantwood Art Colony, directed by Maura Pilcher, who is not here because she just had a baby daughter. This art colony includes 3 fellows, and they are out in communities. And so the idea of taking what we do to communities where they probably would never be getting those kinds of cultural events is incredibly important. Lunch and Learns that we do, even though that very much sounds like outreach, it often involves engagement. Jim Leach talked about the concept of stolen Nazi art at one time, and in the audience were many persons who were affiliated with the Jewish Coalition, and they told stories about what had happened during the war. And so that whole concept of outreach often flows into engagement as well. The Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities has already been mentioned, and Chuck Connerly is in the back. I know he wrote the original grant. Nick Benson has done a wonderful job of working with that, and Sarah San Giovanni now is also working with that particular program. This program is really wonderful to see. When we go into communities, they always, at the end of a semester, have a celebration. And when students are presenting, you can tell that they are so incredibly into what they're doing because they've taken what goes on in the classroom and actually applied it to a real-world setting. So that is really phenomenal. We're also working with resource conservation and development regions throughout the state. And this has allowed us to do a variety of things. We're currently working on a proposal which could bring a lot of help to communities where there are maybe ethnic disparities, situations where children may, for example, have elevated blood lipid levels or elevated blood pressures. We are working together with the Resource Conservation and Development Directors to submit a grant that would allow us who work in health settings to work with the directors in going into schools. And that combination of a faculty member, staff, and students all working together and the community partners also providing a lot of information has really been just a phenomenal way of working on this particular grant. And then finally, the theme semester, which this year is Just Living. Last year it was Food for Thought. We started the theme semester thinking that we probably would have a great deal of difficulty involving a lot of people in that project. But Chuck Swanson, again, who's been a wonderful champion for us, worked with us on a play called All Recipes Are Home. And this year for Just Living, Bullying is going to be the play, and he's going into 8 communities with these plays, and we're working together to do as much as we can to involve the communities. So those are our featured programs. We tried to be very strategic and very organized around specific projects, so you can see that from what we are doing here. We're also working on a website. The idea of this website is to try to take all of the kinds of activities that are going on our campus and have a place for them, so that we still, of course, want each department, each college to be doing exactly what they've been doing, but we would like to, on our website, showcase what's happening and allow for a click to a specific program or project that is going on. So this will also be another way of doing what Barry was just indicating, kind of pulling everything together under one umbrella. We're also doing things with social media, and so you can follow us on Twitter, you can like us on Facebook, and you can view us on Instagram. Tonight, for our keynote speaker, if you want to tweet questions, you can by just using hashtag AskBarbaraH, and you can do that during the lecture if you would like. We will also be passing around a microphone, so you can do it the old-fashioned way as well. So what I would like to do now is introduce our speaker, and she has a rather long bio, and I just want to kind of point some things out to you. Barbara Holland is a professor, a researcher, a consultant who's been recognized internationally. She has done a lot of work with organizational change in higher education, and her focus is on the institutionalization of community engagement. She's worked with many universities across our nation: the University of Nebraska, Omaha, Indiana University, Purdue, the University of Indianapolis, Portland State University, and the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She has served in senior administrative roles in many universities across the United States, and internationally she has been involved in work and engagement in Australia. She has also been very much involved in some federal agencies. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development headquarters is a place where she worked for 2 years, and she worked there under 2 administrations, Clinton and Bush, and so she was there during 9/11, which I'm sure was an exciting time. She is an executive editor of Metropolitan Universities. She received the 2006 Research Achievement Award from the International Association for Research on Service Learning and Community Engagement. In 2008, she was named as one of the first 2 honorary fellows of the Engagement Australia organization. She has been an advisor to 200 academic institutions across 5 nations, and her current work focuses on designing systems to both monitor and then measure the diverse impacts of engagement. Very important. She earned her Bachelor of Journalism degree and Master of Arts degree in journalism from the University of Missouri. She has a PhD in higher education, which came from the University of Maryland, and she currently lives in Portland. So Barbara, we are looking forward to hearing your presentation tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Hi, good evening. I have my planned introduction. Hello, Iowans. My name is Barbara Holland. I'm not running for president. So we can all relax. Must be a fascinating experience for you all. So it's been revealed to you that I am a native of your neighbor state, Missouri, and it feels kind of familiar being in these latitudes, longitudes. I will craft that as part of the story, but I think we can be friends because we've never been in the same athletic conference, so I think we're good. Is that fair? We've never been that competitive. Other institutions in the state we will not name, different story. Look, I have to say it's very exciting to be here tonight because this is an institution that I had not visited before. I'm getting feedback, don't know why, but just acknowledging it. This institution, I was very interested in what the provost and the associate provost had to say. This institution does have a legacy of serving Iowa and engaging with Iowans in many ways. Tonight, what I want to do is actually talk a little bit about higher education itself. I want to share with you some information about new ways that higher education is actually going to become even more involved and relevant to community progress nationally, and what that might mean for this university in this state. You will certainly be hearing news from me of the fundamental changes that are occurring in academic culture right now, and about the emerging pattern of renewal and change in strong and successful universities like this one, who will be the leaders. Like all universities, Iowa will begin to adapt to 21st century modes of knowledge generation, dissemination, and teaching and learning, new forms of academic employment, new models and methods of teaching and learning that involve our students and our external community neighbors and partners as colleagues, all working together beside us in the co-creation of new knowledge and innovations that confer significant benefits to both higher ed and public progress and success. Simply said, higher education is entering a phase of significant change more extensive than any we have seen since the mid-20th century. It is really a time in higher education over the next 10 years of snooze, you lose. The institutions that begin to adapt and operate innovatively now, as I believe Iowa is trying to do, will do much better and be more successful than those that wait and resist and hope the good old days will return. And I'll tell you why that's so. I definitely, after today's experience, see Iowa in the Let's Get Moving group, and I think that's a good thing. I think you have the leadership to do it, and you get to pick a new leader very soon. Here's what I want to share with you in particular tonight is very specific evidence that I believe you are positioned to be a leader in this time of transition. The special reason we're having this event today is it's my privilege and honor tonight to offer my congratulations to University of Iowa for its successful selection as a recipient of the 2015 elective classification for community engagement conferred by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Carnegie defines community engagement in this context as the interaction of higher education and communities for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge in a context of partnership and reciprocity. Very simple statement that says we have learned that we will do better together. The Carnegie Community Engagement Classification is awarded every 5 years. It has been since 2006. It is the highest standard of recognition for community engagement, and colleges and universities voluntarily apply for it by submitting extensive documentation that describes the nature and extent of engagement activities and demonstrates strong institutional support for community engagement. In this 2015 cycle, Iowa was one of 240 institutions receiving the classification for the first time. I remind you there are over 7,000 institutions in the country. Not all applied, but a lot did. And because of the way the process works, we don't reveal the total number because the ones who didn't get it don't want people wondering if it's them. Makes sense, right? I have had the pleasure to be part of the Carnegie National Advisory Panel that helped create this instrument and this process. back in the early 2000s. So I can definitely affirm that the documentation requirements and data requirements for this application requires considerable effort and attention to detail and specificity. There is a reason we allow 2 full years for applicants to prepare their package. Central to the award is the creation, in your case, of the Office of Outreach and Partnership in the Provost portfolio, led by Associate Provost Linda Snetselaar. And this infrastructure that you have created is absolutely essential to your ongoing progress and leadership in this field of community engagement and partnerships. I just want to quickly, without knowing exactly who's here, I know this was a lot of work and it has been rewarded with success, so I would ask that any faculty, staff, and community members who contributed in any way, shared information, read a draft, provided a little quote, in any way, please stand and be appreciated by your colleagues. Come on, that's you. Thank you for that. It's emblematic of people who love this field that they're very shy about saying they did anything. So what does this recognition really mean? Why is it a big deal? What do we mean by community engagement and how is it affecting that change in higher education that I was talking about? The classification scheme itself is evidence of a great transformative change in higher ed, and Iowa is one of the institutions that has the energy to keep driving that change. Across the developed world, all of higher education is immersed in renewing, reinventing, and adapting to changing context of how we teach, how we learn, how we do our research. If you listen to the news, you've heard some really harsh criticisms. If you're hearing the candidates stumping around your state, they have a lot to say about higher education, and not of it is very kind. Not much of it is very kind. Why does it take so long to complete a degree? Why is it so expensive? Is it really worth the cost? Do faculty really do what they're supposed to be doing? I'm going to help you understand, I hope tonight, part of where that comes from. I'm not saying it's fair or rational, but there is a point of understanding of how we became less appreciative for our contribution to society. I believe this institution is one of those that will lead us forward to restore the idea that the uniquely American idea is that education is the source of opportunity and progress. In my career, I've been very fortunate to work in a variety of higher ed leadership roles at universities in the USA and Australia, and because the focus of my own scholarship is organizational change in higher education, which is actually an oxymoron, it's good to have a field that nobody believes is real. I have also been fortunate to learn about the impacts of community-engaged scholarship from direct observation and interaction of all kinds of institutions and their leaders, faculty, students, and community partners, as Linda said in the introduction. The evidence points overwhelmingly to the growing strategic importance of engagement and the relevance of it as an effective response to the changing conditions and expectations of higher ed. That's my point. Community engagement isn't just a nice thing to do. It's not something we do to be a good organizational citizen of Iowa. We do it for that reason. But tonight I want to argue to you that this is a strategy, a pathway, an experience, and a commitment that will help this institution adapt to the very rapid and significant change that's going to occur in higher ed over the next decade. Through community engagement, outreach, and partnerships, higher ed could regain the kind of relevance and appreciation and admiration we had 50 years ago. To understand our future, we must look to our past, so I'm going to take you back in time. It's interesting, in my lifetime, this is the aging process, I realize I have lived through this whole story. Well, not the 1940s part. To many people inside and out the academy, higher education culture seems very slow to change. That's why studying change is so interesting, because we're actually changing all the time. There has been so much change in higher education in each decade, going back to the 1940s. It reveals a pattern of ongoing adaptation and positioning higher education as a critical national resource for progress, beginning, of course, with the GI Bill. So in the 1950s, higher education was absolutely the greatest sector on the radar. Does anybody want to venture to tell me what happened in the 1950s that suddenly made higher education so incredibly important and valuable? Sputnik. Sputnik. Higher ed was at the very heart of national strategies to defend the nation in the Cold War, to win the race to space, to find a cure for polio, launch the war on cancer, ultimately to be the platform for demonstrating in a practical way what civil rights and equity could look like in this country. It was no accident that higher education and schools were chosen as the demonstration of the civil rights laws. It's still a work in progress, but we were always at the heart of how America would progress. Most Americans, including Truman and Eisenhower, believed in the 1950s that Russia's educational and research system was far better than ours, and that we needed to make fast changes to catch up in education and research and knowledge creation that would help us compete internationally and maintain national security. And fundamentally, they were absolutely right. And I will tell you a story of why. I will share a personal memory that is very emblematic of those times. In the 1950s, my father was a country school superintendent in the largest and poorest county in Missouri. And I remember he often took me along in his very old black Chevy sedan. I think it was like a 1947 black Chevy sedan. Very large, very safe car, I'm sure. And we drove around to very remote parts of the county, and he was meeting with families and talking about closing one-room schoolhouses. America in the 50s was still richly populated, and I'm sure Iowa was among it, richly populated in one-room schoolhouses. And my father was commissioned by the state's requirements to create a consolidated school district. That's what those terms mean when we talk about consolidated school district number 22. Today, most people who are under the age of 40 have no idea what that means. So, in 1956, in a very rural county, he was running 17 school buses to pull all the kids from remote country communities, farms, and shacks, to bring them into school where they would be taught by college-educated teachers using modern techniques, modern classrooms, modern books. It was a new idea, and it was the idea that educating the nation would build the economy, create new knowledge and technologies, promote national defense, and grow higher education. The process led then to the idea that education was the way for the country to be successful. In that time, we were the darlings of the idea of an ambitious vision of education as the assurance of a democratic society that would be more successful than any other in the world, although we had not yet confronted in any way our own inattention to the lack of equity of opportunity in our own country. In addition to the introduction of research as a broad and extensive education priority, the rapid growth of commitment to mass access to higher education, we built over 2,000 new academic institutions, community colleges, and regional publics, and many would be in this state would remember that's when they were founded. In 1940, there were 500,000 people in America of college age enrolled in higher education. 20 years later, there were 3.5 million. In 1960, in one decade, 1970, it doubled again to 7 million. How fast we grew, how incredibly rapidly the enterprise that we take for granted today as a presumption of American life was invented in a 30-year period. The rapid growth was amazing and exciting at the time, but it created the foundations of two problems that plague us today that are very important factors in the need for reinvention. First, that rapid growth created a Niagara waterfall of tuition money flowing to us. We were utterly and immediately addicted to tuition as a major source of revenue, and that memory of cheap tuition to make higher education accessible for all is difficult to cope with politically now because obviously times have changed in terms of real dollar value. Secondly, large universities created highly decentralized organizational structures because they were growing so fast. They have people housed in old Army barracks on the University of Missouri campus. You're doubling in size every 5 to 10 years. Budgets were limited in terms there was not much infrastructure. The infrastructure couldn't keep up with the growth. people were doing classes in churches and movie theaters and all kinds of situations. It was easier and more efficient to create a decentralized environment, charge the deans, charge the chairs, go figure it out. And we're left with that now at a time when it's more important to be more effective. Today, both of these factors are problematic in the context of our need to create a new business model, keep higher ed affordable, and engage in more collaborative models of teaching and research internally as well as externally, and contribute to local and national progress. And we'll talk about decentralized, because the opposite of decentralized is not centralized. In higher education, the opposite of decentralized is more collaborative. As thousands of baby boomer faculty and staff entered the workforce in 1960s and 70s, they created the academic culture we have today. It did not exist before then. Much of that workforce is still in place. If you took a snapshot of higher education in the early 2000s, about 40% were hired between 1964 and 1975. Even at the most teaching-focused university, this culture called for each faculty member to concentrate time and effort on research, leading to publications and grants relating to their discipline. This was, and in many places remains, the primary, if not single, key to individual promotion and tenure. With very few exceptions, a single framework, a single indicator of success in academic careers and institutional rankings developed, creating a culture of imitation and competition which remained relatively constant until recently, when we simply couldn't afford it anymore. That culture still dominates our universities. I see smiling faces in the room. Academic freedom has been around for hundreds of years. Tenure has a much longer history, but our current culture, which we so greatly admire and defend, is a very recent invention. It's helpful to realize that, I think. In this model, institutional excellence was largely defined by the sum of the quality and performance of individual faculty decisions, outputs, and actions. So the reputation of the institution was shaped by the coincidental summation of all the things individual faculty chose to do, individual decisions, what I teach, how I interact with my students, what I will research, where I will publish, if I research, if I publish. To be clear, this model was wildly successful and made U.S. research productivity the envy of the world. The aim of winning the Cold War and building a larger nation with greater economic wealth was completely successful. But the model, as economy changed and other things changed, as I will reveal to you, made it unsustainable. For 50 years, we've operated with a stable academic culture of intellectual individualism, and it has shaped that economic business model we have today, reliance on tuition as a primary source of income. More than 70% of institutional budgets go for instruction, but we reward people for research. When times were good in the mid-century, generous public funding made this model work pretty well. But politics, economics, budgets, the nation have changed dramatically. Today, on average across public higher education, 47% of higher ed revenue comes from tuition. Some institutions it has shot up to 60%. A mere 25 years ago, 1990, the average was 24%. As the Cold War wound down in the 1980s, a more instrumental view of higher education was emerged. We were identified by some politicians as a, quote, intellectual luxury. National policy pronounced higher education as a private benefit, not a public good. Student support would shift from grants to loans because they're going to benefit from the education and they should pay for it. Public funding began to decline rapidly, and new performance measures were introduced to prove that we didn't do a very good job, which didn't work out well because we usually did pretty well on performance measures. In almost every state, practical reality, higher education resources declined as states scrambled to manage rising costs of prisons, healthcare, schools, and infrastructure. The vision for higher education was largely limited to economic development, tech transfer, and the production of an educated workforce, yet we, higher education, continued to operate essentially the same way we always had and assumed that somehow the money would return and we could keep the same model. By the turn of this century, scholars began to consider how to renew the relevance of higher education and connect us back to nation building again, how to increase access and diversity in our universities, how to help America and our local communities, nationally and locally, with changing economies, changing demography, changing stresses. Higher education networks and associations organized very large multi-institutional grant and research initiatives in the early 2000s that created new opportunities for universities to learn to operate differently, to start to adapt to computers, technology. These all entered the scenes and had a dramatic effect on the way people started to think about teaching and learning innovations, assessment, growing involvement in concern about research aimed more at what we called then the big questions. I think now we call them the grand challenges. Anyone with access to the internet could become a researcher and a teacher without being affiliated with a university. Also, technology allowed us to connect and interact with any other academic or students almost anywhere in the world. Everything started to change in the dynamics. Today, most universities have adopted new and effective methods of teaching and learning and strategies to reconnect knowledge with important society, economic questions, and this is the thing we call community engagement. These emerging and promising trends are of our own academic invention, our own understanding of new approaches to knowledge generation and dissemination, as well as the need to serve students more effectively in challenging times. Nobody told us to do this. We came to realize that engaging with communities at our local, our state, our regional, and national level is part of how we would adapt to changing times and part of how we would renew the contract, the relationship that had been so productive. Here are a few of the emerging higher education trends, and I'm just going to read them off. These are indicators that are already in motion about what academic culture is going to look like going forward. You will have heard of many of these, I'm sure. Growth in interdisciplinary approaches so that we can explore all of the dimensions of complex challenges before our society and the world. Greater international collaboration and interaction. Greater emphasis on attracting and retaining a highly diverse body of students, faculty, and staff. Diverse not only in race, but in preparation, in perspective, in circumstances, in learning styles, among other factors. Significant integration of undergraduate research into undergraduate learning. Our students are our colleagues. They can be part of our research workforce, and it will change the way they learn as they cultivate the art of inquiry and the development of a questioning mind, something our nation seems a little short of right now. Innovative pedagogies and structured learning pathways that help increase student success. Structured pathways, structured choice, still diverse in learning pathways, but structured choice, not endless choice. Some universities in this country have eligible courses for registration in the numbers of 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. It's a little too much. We need to help students see the path from the beginning to end. Anybody remember AAA triptychs? We need to create this kind of option for students that they see the way from here to there with options that they can choose, but it's clear about what it will cost and how much time it will take. The availability of community-based learning experience has an essential element of competition, as an essential element of competition for student recruitment, retention, and progress. I will say this more than once today, the antidote to the growth in online learning, which is not a bad thing, it is a fabulous thing when done well. It will become very important. It will be part of how we reinvent our business model, how we make higher education affordable, but the complement to it will not just be the preservation of class, it will be the growth of hands-on experiential learning. That is what we already see in students who are deeply involved in online learning. We will also need to develop extensive and collaborative knowledge partnerships, not just with other universities and colleges, but with all sectors of society, business, industry, government, educational, schools, nonprofit sector. We need to partner with all other sectors of society as a way of developing the partnerships that will help us truly explore the complexity of the challenges before our society. These approaches to academic work are becoming common and are sweeping across higher education. And in some of that, I will say, going forward, academic excellence will be described by the sum of the institution's collective intellectual impact and effort on student success and discoveries relevant to complex issues and local and global importance. This will require an extensive agenda of community engagement with all these other sectors, and more we will see communities as classrooms, community as sources of expertise, knowledge, and wisdom, communities as our partners in funding strategies and in creating new knowledge and innovation. Scholarly inquiry, creative activity, basic research, applied research, student learning, the development of that inquiring mind, all these and traditional forms of scholarly endeavor continue, but the methods, venues, strategies for dissemination are becoming more collaborative and dynamic. The dimensions of complex questions before us call for new approaches to knowledge generation and dissemination to both academic and public audiences, a closer connection between teaching, learning, and research, and consideration of the wider community-based sources of essential and relevant expertise and wisdom that exists outside the academy. University of Iowa received the Carnegie classification because of the dynamic approaches you are taking to connecting to Iowans and to engage in partnerships with these other sectors. The partnerships are collaborative. They are spaces where we share planning and implementation of innovative strategies to explore, enrich, and advance a variety of issues important to Iowans. You are listening to communities, you're being influenced by communities, and responding in ways that strengthen opportunities for higher quality teaching, learning, and research. That's the exchange. By listening and learning and working with communities, we're actually improving our own work. It is a win-win. This approach will reap a rich harvest for campus and the state. I had to use an agricultural metaphor somewhere, right? So you have examples. The provost and associate provost have shared with you stories of ArtShare, Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities, the Resource Conservation and Development Partnerships. I met several of the leaders of 3 of those councils today, or members of those councils today, and they are amazing what they are achieving. You have other outreach activities across the institution that are highly affecting healthy choices and lives in community, focusing on different things related to math, science, history, literacy, life skills, gardening, all kinds of exciting things. The theme semester, I think, really warrants a highlight because it is an example of that kind of engaged, structured learning that helps students develop a questioning mind and thinking out your next theme, just living, as in living in a community that is characterized by social justice, is going to be a challenging and exciting semester for you, given the things that are happening in our nation at this time around community civility and safety and respect for difference. There are so many more things you're doing. I need not list them to you. I merely affirm that these are exemplars of new ways of thinking about community engagement as it contributes to teaching, learning, research, and outreach involving faculty, staff, students, and community in collaborative knowledge partnerships. The benefits of this are many, not just great learning and great research, but the recruitment and retention of students of diversity, students of broad diversity. I don't mean just race, but perspective and experience. The opportunity to see your research grow because of this deeper involvement with important issues and questions that are of contemporary interest and that are enlivened and driven forward by connection to other sources of expertise. This is proving this idea of community engagement is a way of starting to explore new streams of revenue and opportunities to relate differently to our donors and to our alumni. The largest gift that has been given to a university for community engagement explicitly so far is $50 million in October 2014 to Cornell University, not an endowment, program money to spend to create Engaged Cornell, which will guarantee that every student in Cornell will have an engaged learning experience, service learning, engaged internship, engaged international study, engaged undergraduate research. This is self-interest. This idea of community engagement changes our relationship with donors, no question. So the fact is, right now, we see emerging new academic culture characterized by collaboration across disciplines, collaboration with external entities, engagement with other sectors, cooperation across universities, sharing programs, sharing faculty, sharing facilities, new forms of knowledge dissemination and review. The journal world is melting, folks, and counting paper publications is just not going to be an eternal option for assessing faculty performance. There are new forms of dissemination, new models of shared governance, which will be interesting to talk about. The blending of teaching and discovery and application across those structured pathways that do bring students into our work. A quick example is the growth of cluster hires, which I understand you are doing here. Cluster hires are a great illustration of this more collaborative, cross-pollination, multidisciplinary kind of approach to complex problems. Some of you, if you don't know about it, the idea is hiring multiple faculty from different disciplines. They may be loosely affiliated with their home discipline, but they are organized and operate as a multidisciplinary team. This has been a feature of the reinvention of Arizona State University, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of South Florida, which is a fast-rising university, and a number of others. And I was delighted to hear it's happening here. It is an extraordinarily effective strategy, given the complexity of the persistent problems that are before us. It makes sense to recognize those multiple dimensions of any kind of question before us. And recent research has shown that those cluster hires are not only improving research productivity and success in research, but it's also enhancing the diversity of faculty. To this dynamic environment, I want to add the story, and this is the part where I kind of look at the back of the room so I don't make eye contact. In this dynamic environment, we must add the news of the exciting energy offered by our entering new faculty of Gen X and Gen Y, coming into academia in rapidly growing numbers, and whose characteristics and interests hew closely to these newer forms and methods of knowledge generation, community and civic engagement, and collaboration. They see teaching, learning, research as integrated activities. They see students as colleagues. They want to involve them in their work. They see the interdisciplinary nature of a question and seek to work in teams to explore answers and results. They have a collective view of the management of workload and the overall mission of the institution. They value both campus and community context and will be choosy about where they live and where they want to raise their family. They will want to work in different intellectual environments at different stages of their life, and perhaps overseas. They are mobile and will move to a different institution to get a more favorable living and working environment. They value mobility over tenure. I see a few nodding heads. I'm trying not to be ageist in this part of things, but this is the unique thing that's happening in higher ed. For the first time in a half a century, every university in this country is renewing its academic workforce, its staff workforce, and it is a chance to hire to the mission, hire to the future, and reinvent, and many institutions are seeking to reinvent themselves. Many are moving quickly to hire large cohorts of new faculty in very large numbers, in part because of these collaborative values. Inevitably, this is a rare opportunity for academic renewal. Some institutions, I tend to ask, but I didn't get the data. I didn't ask for you to give it to me this time, but we'll look it up after I'm gone. Most institutions are already 40 to 50% X and Y and are actually not even really aware of it. Most institutions have 4 generations of faculty and staff working on campus. We haven't seen that since the 1950s either. So it's important to be aware of this because it's creating situations and some misunderstandings, and it's good that we open it up and talk about it and understand what it means. Younger faculty see naturally engagement as a form of scholarship. Many of them had community-based learning or service learning in high school or college. They are creating a new culture as they have the opportunity based on participation in collaborative models of teaching, learning, and research that I described. Their culture will be one that is more complex and diverse, and it require us to learn how to assess and evaluate the quality of diverse methods and representations of quality work. With notable exceptions, some senior faculty and leaders are a little mixed in their reaction toward engagement of the community and often tend to see it as extra work, mere service, a waste of time, or scholarship light. In part, this is because it has not been their tradition. Their tradition was that culture of my performance, my publications, my research. Some were motivated to do it. I did a study of faculty motivations on participation in community engagement in the late 1990s. And for the people who were in the high category of, yes, community engagement is for me, all of them said when interviewed, well, actually, I was an activist in the 60s, and this is the way I keep it going. So it's a personality trait, if nothing else. It is in part because it deviates from traditional academic culture, but it is also partly personal history, no doubt. Thus, it's important to be aware we have at least two cultures at play in this university right now. And I think my recommendation is open discussion, awareness of the contrasts and the working styles will help support the challenges of academic leadership over the next decade. Everything I've said about Gen X and Gen Y actually comes from large-scale research done by my colleague Kathy Trower at Harvard, who she has done so well at Harvard. She retired at 54, and she's now doing consulting for nonprofits for nearly nothing. Good on Kathy. But it's from Harvard, so it must be true, right? And that's where she did very careful research on the characteristics and working styles of new generation faculty. So it is a good idea to share that with senior faculty. I always like to believe, as my father did, that everyone will do their best to adapt to changing times if given the information and the opportunity. We are, after all, scholars, and if we read and understand research, then hopefully we will act on it. So I suspect someone is also going to write a book about the two generations or something. We'll have to come up with a good title. The important point is that we too openly recognize that there are differences in values and approaches and be attentive to ensuring an institution-wide understanding of the dynamics and how we're going to survive the transition. As I said at the start, the next decade is going to be a time of huge transition and change in higher education, and I would add, I hope it's also a time of renewal in our national sense of how knowledge relates to progress and success in communities. So whatever news pundits and political candidates may say, a healthy and robust higher education system is absolutely essential to the future of our economy, our communities, in this democratic society that has been a wonderful experiment of the last few hundred years. Evidence and research over decades shows that higher level of education among the citizenry leads to less crime, less incarceration, less drug use, domestic violence, child abuse, better health outcomes, better income, pay more taxes, less divorce, great equity of opportunity, and a host of other benefits that are good for the individual and good for society. As the University of Iowa focuses on working with other sectors to fulfill the idea of better futures for Iowans, it will expand its public engagement activities in key areas that align with state needs. This is the public value proposition of higher education going forward. As I visit cities around America, it is very clear to me that change is in the air. This last year has impacted so many cities in confronting the reality of dysfunction in their communities. Hope is in the air. The communities themselves, from the grassroots up, are increasing the intensity of their own efforts to implement actions and changes in strategies that will increase equity of opportunity, equity in education, equity in health and well-being, equity and access to the full benefits of life in a democratic society, among other rights and privileges. The level of collaboration and connection across all the other sectors is on the rise. We need to get on the train. Our higher education institutions, like this wonderful University of Iowa, are also optimistic seekers of change and progress. Higher education is essential to economic development, health services, and the preparation of a skilled workforce. But it's also striving through engagement, partnerships, outreach, to restore the public relevance and purpose of public universities as creators of public good, contributors to social and cultural fabric, to community progress and success. We do it because this is the American vision for education. This is our view of how higher ed contributes to a sustainable and equitable society. Together, we get more done. Nationally, the sense of urgency is on the rise. What is the worth of higher education if it does not advance the human condition, if we do not connect with external sources of expertise, wisdom, and lived experience to address the most obvious threats and opportunities facing our communities, if our state budgets are being consumed by prisons, education, healthcare, and infrastructure, what are we doing about it? Why aren't we helping those costs be reduced by finding more effective strategies, more effective program models, ways to measure performance, and to actually turn it around? It's time that this uniquely important view of higher education, this university, and others be recognized as exemplary institutions seeking to make the change that will renew our sense of those objectives for society. I want to congratulate again the University of Iowa for the Carnegie Engagement Classification. It's a reward and a recognition, but it just means keep going. You have earned it with well-deserved praise for your effective involvement in partnerships to build that better future for Iowans, and I know that other large public universities will learn from you. And I want to thank all of you who have spent your time here this evening, be you scholars or citizens, parents or students, staff or administrators, for all you do, for your commitment of time and talent toward the development of a successful path for our communities, for Iowa, and for this university. Thank you for being leaders in your community. Thank you for letting me be here.
We can take some questions from the audience. Yeah, Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm the Museum of Art director.
Hi, Sean.
And
I like the picture of your sort of the vision of the museum.
thank you. We're all outreach. Yeah. We don't have a museum, so
What is art for?
This
Not
is
the
it.
people.
As I travel across the state of Iowa, which I do a lot, I've noticed that in many ways the future of Iowa and the future of America is old people.
Yep.
And you sort of implied that this generation, which is now downsizing and retiring, is engaging in lifelong learning. And this is a very large and important segment of our society, of course. But at the same time, when I go to Washington, D.C., or I talk to funders, there is virtually no interest in supporting these groups. I keep getting shunted and sent off to DHSS or, Health and Human Services. It's all about health, and there's very little about education, particularly in the last 20 or 30 years of people's lives. And so my question is, how do you see community engagement with regards to that very large, important part of our society? And what are some specific strategies that you see would work?
And a wonderfully important topic. It's a unique moment in our national history. I like Bill Bryson. Sometimes you got to read a book that makes you giggle. And Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid. He's an Iowan. He talks about growing up in Iowa. And I actually looked this up before I came here because I remembered he used the statistics in his book, because his theme of the part of the book about his childhood is there were so many children everywhere. He said, I would go out and play in the city park and there were like 600 other kids. because between 1946 and 1964, we had 76 million babies. And the census in 1960, the biggest cohort in America were children under 12. We should have taken over the country then. We waited too long. So yes, I think actually the government agencies are utterly overwhelmed by the aging crisis. I think they are terrified and frozen of what's going to happen when all of us, and I have to use personal pronouns here, are going to need assistance of one kind or another. I live alone. Who's going to help me? Ooh, I did have my long-term care insurance, but anyway, too much news. But I think people are overwhelmed by it. It is such a huge population. We have been around so long. We have led so many things for so long. In some ways, the generation that is sort of the tweeners that don't see themselves as baby boomers and don't see themselves as Gen X feel kind of ignored and lost. So most of what's happened for seniors so far has been organized by seniors. And higher education has started to really think about this. You'll see more going on, better examples of engagement with seniors through higher education activities and programs and strategies, recognizing that alumni are getting older, but that your communities are getting older. Florida, Arizona, California, these universities in these states, Florida especially, Florida Gulf Coast, Florida's newest university, I think. I don't think they've started another one. Fabulous programs for the cohort of Naples and Lawrence County are all over 65. So the vast majority. So they've created all kinds of programming and opportunities. And I think that's the way it's going to be. Universities recognize it. There's no support for it. There's no funding for it. You've raised a great issue. I see universities organizing opportunities for seniors to participate and be engaged. Some of them are bringing them in to interact with kids on move-in day and things like that. And it's not well organized, but there is stuff going on.
I will take our first question from Twitter. One user asked, and my phone just went away. As the University of Iowa outreach grows, how do we ensure diversity and inclusion, combating institutionalized racism and microaggressions?
Yeah, we've never really confronted the race issue. Higher education was used as the platform to introduce the idea of equity in the early 1960s. And I was a doctoral student at University of Maryland in the late 1980s, and they went under court order again for failure to fulfill any success in diversifying their student body. This is a national issue. It's not just a higher education issue. The question is, can higher education do what it's done before on other issues and be a leader in talking about how we actually change the conversation in our communities? I do a lot of work in my editorial work with metropolitan universities, urban universities, and this is really the focus of their conversation right now. Look at what's happened in cities across America in the last year regarding racial conflict and racial misunderstanding, poor policing, and the recognition that our training methods are setting up these kinds of conditions. It's higher education institutions, public administration, criminal justice, sociology, public administration. I know programs in many cities, certainly in the East and the Midwest, that are taking this on. How are we going to actually, as in all public issues, use scholarship to show new strategies, new interventions, new ways of communicating, new strategies of training people in public positions to be culturally competent, to be aware of their own racism, to be conscious of what it means, to see that our persistent addiction to racism prevents progress in communities, that it undermines not just individual opportunity, but it undermines all of our opportunities. And that's going to be something that I think higher education can have a huge impact on, as we have in the past, but not always successfully. We don't say we have the answers, but I think our focus of discovering new strategies for looking at the conditions will contribute to the opportunity for opening up new conversations and new ways of interacting in communities. And part of that is absolutely fundamental is we have to get more young people from those communities to come and be in the university, feel safe here, be welcome, be successful here. And that's our responsibility. And if we can start that flow, then that's going to change what happens when they go back in community.
We're coming up to 8 o'clock. We have another audience question.
I just have a question about how do we begin? Do you have recommendations for changing the conversations with politicians, with other government officials, and with the society at large to really, you've talked about all the benefits of higher education, and I don't think anybody has those conversations anymore.
They don't, because in the 1980s, politicians announced this is irrelevant, shoved this off the table, and that was the end of the story. And now we have the problem. I mean, I've been working in this, telling the story of community engagement. Look what we've done to increase the performance in underperforming schools. We place faculty and students, graduate students in underperforming schools, and we create great improvements and success. And we report that to the local politicians, and they're like, well, yeah, but what else have you done for me lately? I mean, I think, I have to be honest, I always am. I met Harry Truman in 1957, and I think I channel him sometimes. I just sort of say it the way it is. Truthfully, I think the politicians don't matter. We have to hoik our own socks up. And there are critical problems in our community. Racial inequity is number one, and it's exploding all over this country, and this time we have got to grab it and address it. And we are scholars, we're people with knowledge, we're people who know methods. We may not have the answers, we certainly don't. If we did, we would have shared them. But we have the ability, the skill, the gift of inquiry, the gift of bringing people together and talking and understanding. I think we just have to go do things that start to show, and ultimately the best thing that can happen is people in communities say, this happened in our community because of the University of Iowa. The politicians will listen to them. They don't care what we say. I'm not a cynical person, but I think the shutdown is so complete. Ultimately, what we have to do is show communities, show citizens that our institutions contribute to progress, our relevance to contemporary questions, our relevance to the enrichment of arts and culture and civility in communities, and the community will speak for us. I may be a dreamer, but that's the way I see it. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a privilege to be with you.